I was sipping coffee and testing a new drone app when I heard the screech. Karen's signature, high-pitched "excuse me," that could peel paint. I looked up just in time to see her storming across the lawn in fuzzy leopard slippers, aggressively pointing at my wife, Amina, who was adjusting a shoulder holster and checking her comms in the driveway. Karen shrieked, "You can't cosplay as FBI in a gated community." Before Amina could answer, Karen already had 911 on the line. The next 10 minutes would go viral across 5 platforms, leave Karen in tears, and change the HOA forever. And it all started because she mistook an on-duty FBI agent for a Halloween role-player. That morning had started like any other, calm and uneventful, with the HOA newsletter threatening to fine someone over lawn heights and the usual bickering on the neighborhood forum. Amina had been preparing for a delicate surveillance op tied to a regional identity theft investigation. Her assignment: monitor one of the houses down the road where suspicious nighttime deliveries had been tracked. This was no casual operation. It had been coordinated for months, involved 2 departments, and required her presence in tactical gear, subtle enough not to scream "SWAT," but official enough that any halfway observant person would know she was law enforcement. Unfortunately, Karen was not halfway observant. She was the type of person who thought the FBI was a branch of the Homeowners Association. With her oversized sunglasses and a Chihuahua-sized Pomeranian named Tinsel, she considered herself a community protector. Translation: she spent more time peeking through blinds and filing HOA violations than living her actual life. And today, she had locked eyes on her latest target, my wife. Amina had barely stepped out of the garage when Karen approached, voice dripping with condescension. "I don't know what little game you're playing, but we have children here, and I don't appreciate Halloween costumes in June." Amina looked up, confused, then realized Karen was staring at her bureau-issued polo shirt and duty belt. Calmly, she said, "Ma'am, I'm on duty. I'm with the bureau." Karen scoffed and waved a hand like she was shooing off a fly. "Sure you are, sweetheart. And I'm Beyoncé. If you don't leave this property, I'm calling the cops for impersonating federal agents." I walked out just in time to catch the last bit of her threat. I tried to explain, kindly at first, that Amina wasn't impersonating anything and that she was operating within full federal authority. But Karen was already dialing, eyes blazing with performative outrage. "Yes, I'd like to report someone pretending to be an FBI agent. Yes, in tactical gear. Yes, she's in my neighborhood with a weapon." She made sure her voice was loud enough for the neighbors across the street, who had begun to peek through their blinds, to hear every word. Amina just sighed, hands on hips, the patience of a seasoned agent on her face. The officers arrived fast, quicker than expected. Karen marched to the curb to greet them like she was part of the welcoming committee. "That's her," she hissed, pointing to Amina, who stood composed, badge in hand, earpiece in place, ID ready. The lead officer barely looked at Karen. He stepped forward and nodded respectfully to Amina. "Agent Patel. We were notified you might be operating in the area." "All good." Karen froze. You could practically hear her ego deflate. "Excuse me," she stammered. She's real?" Amina gave her a dry smile. "Yes, ma'am. I'm very real. And your 911 call just disrupted a federal surveillance op. That's called interference with a federal officer." Karen blinked, then started backpedaling. I thought it was a prank. She had that whole movie outfit and everything. You people dress like that." Amina didn't dignify the comment. The other officer chuckled and muttered something about YouTube and Karen's as he walked back to the cruiser. Karen wasn't done. In true HOA fashion, she followed us back toward our house, launching into a bizarre, half apology, half complaint. "Well, I still think it's dangerous to be walking around in gear like that. Someone could mistake her for a threat. We have HOA standards, you know." Amina turned to her slowly. "Do your HOA standards supersede federal jurisdiction?" Karen looked flustered. "Well, maybe not legally, but community comfort matters too. By now, more neighbors had gathered outside, whispering, pointing, some even laughing. One neighbor I'd never spoken to gave me a thumbs up. Another whispered to his wife, "I told you she was legit. Karen just got wrecked." Even the mailman lingered longer than necessary to soak up the chaos. Karen, red-faced and puffing, stormed back toward her house, hurling insults under her breath about cosplay and government overreach. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. A misunderstanding. An embarrassment. Lesson learned, maybe. But no. The next day, Karen posted a lengthy diatribe on the community forum titled, "Costumed Clowns and Community Safety." She described a suspicious woman, dressed like an FBI agent, who refused to verify her identity and accused her of being part of a harassment scheme. She even hinted that deep state actors were targeting her home specifically. She urged the board to pass a motion banning unauthorized uniforms in public areas. One reply simply said, "Karen, sit down." It got 47 likes in an hour. We laughed about it over dinner, but Amina was already sensing this wouldn't blow over. "She's going to push this," she said. "People like her don't know when to quit. And if she's interfering this much, she might be more connected to the case than we thought." That line stuck with me. It wasn't just a neighbor overstepping. It was a potential threat to an active investigation. That night, as Amina reviewed surveillance footage, something peculiar showed up. Karen's backyard wasn't as innocent as it seemed. There were two unfamiliar individuals entering through her side gate under cover of darkness, both carrying boxes and wearing gloves. They didn't ring the doorbell. They didn't use the front gate. And they were out in minutes. Amina rewound the footage. There it was again, at least 3 separate visits over 2 weeks. Always late, always sneaky. Suddenly, Karen's concerned citizen routine seemed more like a cover. We both stared at the screen, connecting dots neither of us liked. "She's not just annoying," Amina said finally. "She's involved." I didn't doubt it. And if Amina was right, Karen had just done more than call the cops on the FBI. She'd put herself squarely in the middle of a federal crime scene. By morning, things had shifted. Amina's team began pulling permits and data. Karen's name came up attached to several shell LLCs, and a package drop was scheduled for later that week, right at Karen's address. As I watched my wife transform from neighbor to full federal powerhouse, I realized something dangerous was brewing under all that HOA pettiness. And Karen, clueless as ever, had just declared war on the FBI. The morning after the viral confrontation, you'd think someone like Karen would feel shame, or at least retreat into her wine cellar for a few days of reflection. But instead, she emerged emboldened, energized by the attention like a moth to a flamethrower. It started with a neighborhood-wide email blast, sent at exactly 6:12 a.m., with the subject line in all caps: "Community Safety Alert, Impersonation and Threats." The body of the email was a long, ranting mess accusing my wife of being part of a psychological operation, complete with conspiracy theories, a warning about deep state tactics, and a call for an emergency HOA meeting. She even attached a pixelated screenshot of Amina mid-sentence, claiming it was proof of suspicious behavior and military-grade equipment on civilian grounds. What Karen didn't know was that the FBI had already begun flagging every move she made online. That email? Copied, archived, and added to the growing investigation folder. But in the moment, it felt like petty HOA drama dialed up to 11. That same afternoon, the HOA board gathered in the community clubhouse for the so-called emergency session. And it was every bit the circus you'd imagine. Karen marched in with a clipboard, her Pomeranian in a stroller, and a half-finished Starbucks iced coffee clutched like a trophy. Her supporters, mostly other board retirees who hadn't had this much excitement since bingo night got cancelled, clapped for her as she took center stage like she was running for mayor. The board, made up of 5 volunteers who clearly had no idea what they were walking into, tried to establish order. But Karen launched straight into a speech about threats to the neighborhood. She waved printed photos, drew circles with a red marker like she was hosting a true crime podcast, and insisted that Amina's presence was psychologically disturbing to children and pets. When someone asked whether she had verified her claims, she scoffed and said, "I know what I saw. That woman had weapons. Real or fake, it's irrelevant. This is a family community, not a movie set." I sat in the back, arms folded, watching with disbelief. Amina stood beside me, calm and unreadable as ever. She had no intention of addressing the meeting herself. She wasn't here as a neighbor or a wife. She was here as a federal agent, gathering evidence of obstruction. And Karen, unknowingly, was supplying it by the minute. The board hesitated but said they would allow both parties to respond before voting on a proposed motion to temporarily suspend military-style presence in the neighborhood. Karen beamed as if she had won something. Then, without warning, another voice entered the room. Agent Delgado stepped through the door, dressed in a tailored suit with his ID clipped to his breast pocket. He calmly introduced himself and stated, for the record, that Special Agent Amina Patel was operating within full federal authorization. He handed over a packet to the board that included documents from the Bureau, a signed warrant for surveillance within the community, and legal notices confirming that any interference would constitute obstruction of justice. You could hear a pin drop. Karen's smile faltered. She tried to recover. But how do we know those aren't fake? Anyone can print a badge these days. I saw a YouTube video. Delgado didn't blink. Ma'am, impersonating a federal agent is a federal offense. But accusing a real federal agent of impersonation while disrupting an operation? That's obstruction, and we're building a case. The room shifted instantly. Some of the board members leaned away from Karen. Others suddenly discovered a deep interest in their notepads. The power she thought she had began slipping through her fingers, but she clung to it like it was the last float on a sinking ship. Still not ready to surrender, Karen stood and puffed herself up. Well, if this is truly a government operation, then I demand to know what it's about. As a member of the HOA, I have a right to know what's happening on my block. Delgado smiled politely. You actually don't. That's why it's called a classified operation. But thank you for confirming your intent to interfere. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it again, her words stalling in the back of her throat. The board wisely voted to table her motion indefinitely, citing conflicts with federal jurisdiction. Karen didn't even stay for the end of the meeting. She stormed out, yanking Tinsel's stroller behind her, muttering something about getting the media involved. And she did. The next day, a local news van appeared at the entrance of the subdivision. Somehow, Karen had managed to convince a minor cable news reporter to come cover her tale of federal injustice. She gave a dramatic interview near the duck pond, claiming she was being targeted, harassed, and silenced by the government for doing her civic duty. The clip aired that evening, and while it didn't exactly go viral, it attracted just enough attention to bring more heat to the neighborhood, precisely what the FBI didn't need. By that point, even the neighbors who had supported her began backing away. Someone leaked screenshots of Karen's neighborhood forum posts, ones where she implied the FBI was tracking her because she knew too much, and accused several residents of being operatives planted by the feds. She had entered full tinfoil hat mode. Meanwhile, Amina remained focused. She spent her evenings reviewing drone footage, surveillance logs, and tracking drop locations. And then something major surfaced. One of the packages delivered to the address under surveillance, Karen's next-door neighbor, was traced back to a shell company tied to a money laundering network. But it got better. The footage revealed that Karen had not only signed for one of the deliveries but had brought the package into her home. This was no longer about a nosy neighbor disrupting an agent. This was about a woman who may have unknowingly or intentionally inserted herself into a criminal operation. The FBI wasn't going to move just yet. They needed more. They started watching her backyard, noticing movements late at night. Two men visited, always with gloves, always in a vehicle with dealer plates. One time, Karen handed them what appeared to be a small tablet. Another time, she covered the security camera with a gardening glove as they entered. But the mistake she made, her fatal mistake, was during one of those late-night visits when she forgot to disconnect her smart doorbell. It captured clear audio of one of the men referencing account numbers and encrypted drives. When Amina heard it, her entire demeanor changed. She stood, called Delgado, and within hours, a plan was set in motion. Karen, however, had other ideas. She wasn't slowing down. In fact, her next move shocked even me. She submitted a cease and desist letter, handwritten and riddled with typos, demanding that Amina stop parading around like a federal agent, claiming it was traumatizing her pet. She then followed it with a petition, scrawled in Sharpie, taped to every mailbox on the block, calling for the immediate resignation of the HOA board due to their collusion with known government impersonators. It was so unhinged that people thought it was satire. Some neighbors even signed it just to mess with her. One wrote Buzz Lightyear, and another added a drawing of a squirrel. But behind the ridiculous behavior was something more serious. Karen wasn't just lashing out for attention anymore. She was panicking. Her erratic behavior wasn't just the result of delusion. The warrant came through just after dawn. It was delivered to Amina by her unit's courier, sealed in a folder that bore the unmistakable weight of finality. The evidence was solid. Recorded footage, traceable packages, and now a confession from one of the two men who had been frequenting Karen's backyard shed. He had been picked up in another state on an unrelated charge and spilled everything in an attempt to lighten his sentence. What he revealed stunned the Bureau. Karen, according to him, had been acting as a go-between, though whether she knew the full extent of her role remained unclear. She received packages, relayed basic instructions, and occasionally allowed storage space to be used. He claimed she thought she was helping a friend's consulting business that needed privacy. When they asked why she kept helping, his answer was simple: she liked feeling important. By mid-morning, the operation was greenlit. Delgado briefed the local officers for coordination, and Amina reviewed the tactical entry plan. The neighborhood had no idea what was coming. There would be no warning this time. No HOA debates, no Karen rants posted online. The Bureau had decided that whatever Karen was involved in had to be stopped quietly but decisively. If she wasn't a criminal, she was dangerously adjacent to criminal activity and had disrupted a months-long investigation. Either way, it was time to end it. I watched from our front porch as the unmarked vehicles rolled in and quietly took positions along the cul-de-sac. Amina was in full tactical mode now, vest strapped, comms clipped, and her expression unreadable. She turned to me once before getting into the vehicle and said, "If she tries to talk her way out of this, don't engage." I nodded. I wasn't going to get in the way. I just wanted to see how this story ended. They moved at precisely 9 a.m. Karen had just come out to water her roses, still in her morning robe and slippers, completely unaware of the federal tidal wave about to hit her doorstep. Delgado and two other agents approached her calmly. One of them held the warrant. Karen blinked at them like they were offering her a free sample at Costco. When they read the charges, obstruction, misuse of property, and aiding in the storage of illicit materials, her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Then, true to form, she screamed. It was loud, dramatic, and echoed through the cul-de-sac like a siren of ego collapsing. "You can't be serious," she cried. "You people are still pretending this is real? This is harassment. This is targeted bullying. I'm calling my lawyer." Delgado handed her a phone. "Go ahead, ma'am. But please be aware we have a sealed indictment and a federal order. This is not optional." She stumbled back as agents moved past her and into the backyard. Neighbors began gathering at their windows, peeking through curtains and half-closed blinds. A few stood on their driveways, arms crossed, watching in stunned silence. Nobody moved to help Karen. Not this time. The shed door was pried open. Inside, agents found 4 crates, each labeled with phony shipping stickers, and several locked cases. One held encrypted devices, another had burner phones and ledgers. There were stacks of fake IDs, stolen financial documents, and a partially assembled rig for card skimming. Karen stood on the grass, jaw slack as they brought each item out one by one. She kept whispering, "That's not mine. I don't even know what that is." But her voice had lost its usual confidence. The arrogance had bled away, replaced by raw confusion, or perhaps the slow realization that her world was collapsing. When the media van arrived, Karen's expression twisted into something else entirely, an attempt to spin it, to grab back some control. She waved at the camera. "This is all a mistake. I was set up. I'm just a homeowner." But the agents ignored her. Amina gave a brief statement to the press confirming that a federal warrant had been executed and that the matter involved an active financial crimes investigation. She didn't mention Karen's name, but everyone knew. The footage, of course, went viral. The sight of a woman in a floral robe screaming about government conspiracies while agents in tactical gear hauled boxes from her shed was too perfect. Memes exploded. A clip of her yelling, "I want to speak to the real FBI," was looped with techno music and hit 1 million views in under 12 hours. The community forum, once her echo chamber, now lit up with jokes, gifs, and someone even uploaded a bingo card titled "Karen's Excuses." The best part, though, was still to come. During interrogation, Karen tried to explain everything as a series of misunderstandings. She claimed she thought the crates were part of a logistics side hustle run by a friend of her nephew. She said she never opened anything, didn't know what was inside, and only offered storage because they promised to keep it quiet and pay her HOA fees for the year. But then they showed her footage of her opening one of the crates and rifling through envelope. Footage of her handing off a device and taking an envelope in return. Her eyes widened and the facade cracked again. The plea deal was offered quickly. Karen could either cooperate and surrender digital evidence stored in her home devices or face the possibility of multiple charges stacking up, including conspiracy to commit financial fraud. She broke faster than expected, turned over her laptop, her burner phone, and even named the contact who had connected her to the operation in the first place. It turned out to be a man named Vic, a known scammer who had reinvented himself in different cities over the years. And now, thanks to Karen's blundering involvement, they had a line on him too. The news sent shockwaves through the community. 4 weeks, Karen had paraded herself as a hero, a whistleblower, a defender of neighborhood safety. Now she was just the woman who handed a criminal network access to federal land because they complimented her roses and offered her a discount on patio furniture. The HOA, eager to distance itself, held a vote and formally removed her from all committee positions. Her Facebook page was deactivated. Her wine group disbanded. Even Tinsel the Pomeranian looked embarrassed. Meanwhile, Amina continued her work quietly. She didn't gloat. She didn't throw shade. But the neighborhood began to treat her very differently. People waved. Some apologized for not believing her sooner. One elderly couple baked us a lemon cake with, "Thanks for your service," written in icing. It wasn't necessary, but it was appreciated. Karen, still clinging to whatever narrative she could salvage, began claiming she had been framed. That the packages had been planted. That the footage had been manipulated. But the damage was done. The evidence was clear. Her home had been the epicenter of a crime ring, whether she intended it or not. And worse, she had tried to take down a federal agent over it. The best moment came a week later when I saw her sitting at the HOA clubhouse, not as a board member, but waiting in line for a required mediation session. She wouldn't meet my eyes. For once, she had no clipboard, no stroller, no micromanaging tone. Just a person in over her head who mistook attention for authority and paid dearly for it. The HOA had become quiet again. Peaceful. The kind of place where people cared more about potlucks than politics. But for Amina and the Bureau, things weren't over. They had traced the operation's routes across 3 states, and Karen's involvement had. The week following the raid turned our quiet cul-de-sac into something out of a made-for-TV movie. Camera crews came and went. Neighbors speculated in whispers behind hedges. Everyone had a theory about how deep Karen's involvement went, but nobody could deny one thing. Her fall from self-appointed grace was spectacular. 4 years she had ruled the HOA like a middle manager with too much time and not enough power, issuing fines for unapproved garden gnomes and organizing passive-aggressive potlucks. Now she was reduced to pacing nervously in her own driveway, dodging reporters and pretending she hadn't become the national face of HOA insanity. The FBI hadn't released her name officially, but that hadn't stopped the internet. The video of her yelling at Amina had gained millions of views and become the top trending meme of the week. Someone edited it with subtitles in 4 languages. Another version remixed her infamous line, "You can't wear that in public," into a dubstep track. People were dancing to it on TikTok. Her HOA picture had even been photoshopped onto a fake movie poster titled Suburban Justice, Karen's Reign Ends. But beneath all the mockery and meme fuel, something more serious had started to brew. Karen had retained a lawyer. Not a particularly good one, judging by how often he was seen arguing on his Bluetooth in the clubhouse parking lot, but she was preparing for a legal battle. At least that's what she claimed. The truth was, she was barely holding it together. The FBI hadn't arrested her yet, but the investigation hadn't stopped either. Delgado and his team were still digging into the packages, the aliases tied to the phony LLCs, and the offhand remarks she'd made to neighbors that now sounded a lot more like veiled admissions than harmless gossip. Then came the summons. Karen was to appear before a federal grand jury. It wasn't a formal arrest, but it might as well have been. The HOA group chat lit up within minutes. Even people who never posted started chiming in with popcorn emojis and stunned disbelief. Amina didn't comment. She simply prepared for court. She had been called to testify, not just as a witness to Karen's interference, but as the lead agent on the entire case. I could see the shift in her demeanor. She didn't want revenge. She didn't even want attention. She just wanted to put this behind us and finish the job with the same integrity she brought to every assignment. The courthouse was buzzing that morning. Cameras swarmed outside. Karen arrived in a beige pantsuit that looked like it had been borrowed from a soap opera courtroom scene. Her lawyer, sweating through his collar, tried to shield her from the media, but she kept turning toward the cameras, waving and saying, "This is all a misunderstanding. I believe in due process." It was a jarring contrast from the woman who had once called the cops because someone's trash bin was left out past noon. Inside, Amina took the stand with quiet composure. She answered each question clearly, detailing the timeline, the evidence collected, and the direct disruptions caused by Karen's actions. When asked about the emotional impact of being accused publicly, she simply said, "I signed up for this job knowing not everyone would understand it. But interfering with an operation doesn't just put me at risk. It puts entire investigations in jeopardy. And that's not something we can laugh off." Karen stared from her seat, jaw clenched tight. At one point she tried to whisper something to her lawyer, who subtly shook his head. The jury watched everything with sharp interest. There were no outbursts, no fireworks, just the steady unraveling of her story. Surveillance photos, transaction receipt, email logs, all placed carefully into evidence. And every time she thought she might object or question something, another image or clip shut her down before the words could leave her mouth. But the most damning moment came from her own phone record. In one text to her supposed contact, "Vic," she'd written, "got the new batch. I'll leave it where we agreed." Same deal. That message alone dismantled any argument that she was unaware of what was happening. She tried to argue that it was a gardening supply exchange. No one in the courtroom believed that for a second. After court, the footage aired nationwide. Late-night comedians joked about the HOA agent who tried to out-Karen the FBI. One skit featured an actress dressed in a bathrobe pretending to detain her Amazon driver for failing to show ID. It was absurd, but in a way, it mirrored the absurdity of everything that had really happened. Karen had leaned so far into her role as a neighborhood watchdog that she never realized she was being watched in return. Neighbors who had once tolerated her antics were now actively avoiding her. Even her so-called best friend Linda, who used to host monthly sangria nights with her, was overheard at the community pool saying, "I always knew she'd crack. I just didn't know it'd be on camera." Karen started walking her dog in a hoodie and sunglasses, looking over her shoulder like she expected another raid at any moment. Her HOA privileges were suspended, pending the outcome of the legal process, but that didn't stop her from trying to find someone for painting their shutters coral instead of terracotta. The board shredded her complaint and sent it back with a note: "This is a federal free zone now." Amina, meanwhile, quietly returned to work, helping bring down the rest of the ring connected to Karen's involvement. Each time a new arrest was made in a nearby city, she'd get a silent nod from Delgado and move on to the next name. But it wasn't just about clearing a case file anymore. The entire bureau had taken note of how close this situation had come to derailing a major operation. New protocols were being drafted. Training sessions were being updated. Karen's actions had accidentally forced the agency to rethink how neighborhood interference could compromise undercover work. It was ironic. The woman who believed she was protecting her street had accidentally triggered a national policy revision. The final twist came 2 days after Karen's court hearing. A neighbor, someone we'd barely spoken to, showed up at our door with a box. He introduced himself as Marvin and said he used to be friends with Karen's husband, Ted. They had drifted apart after Ted moved out 6 months earlier. Marvin said he'd found something strange in a storage locker that Karen had briefly rented under Ted's name, and he wasn't sure what to do with it. Amina opened the box and found more fake IDs, burner phones, and a folder labeled HOA Notes. Inside were records of meetings Karen had with unnamed individuals, along with scribbled dollar amounts and initials. It was the missing piece. Amina immediately called Delgado. Within hours, the Bureau secured the evidence, confirmed its authenticity, and added new charges to the case. Karen had not only assisted but had tried to keep a side stash of materials in case things went south. It was a backup plan, a paranoid one, but it showed intent. And that, in federal court, is everything. That night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Amina finally let herself laugh. Not a loud laugh, not a victorious one, but something small and earned. I handed her a lemonade and asked if she ever imagined a suburban cul-de-sac would be the site of one of her most bizarre. It was supposed to be the final stretch. After months of surveillance, subpoenas, unexpected twists, and viral infamy, everyone assumed Karen would lay low until her court date. But if this entire saga had taught us anything, it was that Karen didn't know how to back down. She was like a bad Wi-Fi signal, unreliable, frustrating, and always popping up at the worst possible moment. The neighborhood was settling into a tentative peace. The HOA had stopped arguing over mulch color. People were barbecuing again. But Karen, now under house arrest and equipped with an ankle monitor, wasn't ready to accept her fate. In fact, she was about to do something so reckless that it stunned even the seasoned agents who had dealt with far worse threat. It started when she showed up at the HOA clubhouse during a private meeting she wasn't even authorized to attend. Wearing oversized sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat, and a cardigan like she was starring in a courtroom drama, she burst through the door claiming she had new evidence that would exonerate her. The board president, a retired dentist who had only taken the job because nobody else volunteered, nearly choked on his coffee. Karen laid out a messy pile of papers she said proved she was framed, that the FBI had been using her home as a decoy site, and that Agent Amina Patel had been part of some deep state conspiracy involving cryptocurrency and property fraud. The documents were printouts from fringe conspiracy blogs and badly edited screenshots with red circles drawn in what looked like lipstick. The board tried to calmly explain that none of this was within their jurisdiction and that she was violating her restrictions by being there. Karen accused them of collusion, screamed something about civil liberties, and stormed out again, leaving behind a trail of glitter from her handbag and a stunned silence. Word of her meltdown spread fast. Even the local deli offered a Karen's Conspiracy wrap on special for the rest of the week. Turkey, ham, and a whole lot of bologna. But the FBI wasn't laughing. Later that evening, Delgado called Amina and asked to meet in person. The Bureau had been monitoring Karen's digital activity since the raid, and now there was a disturbing development. She had been trying to contact one of the former operatives connected to the laundering ring, someone who was currently in protective custody. Her messages were vague, but they hinted at trying to make a deal and reveal the truth. They couldn't allow her to tamper with witnesses or compromise the case any further. Delgado warned that if she made another move, they'd have no choice but to revoke her bail and detain her. But Karen, in her usual oblivious defiance, took it a step further. 2 nights later, she slipped out of her home at 3:17 a.m., cutting the ankle monitor with a pair of garden shears and tossing it into a neighbor's koi pond. Her car was gone by the time the alert was triggered. Within minutes, federal agents descended on the block, knocking on doors, asking for sightings. Amina stood in the driveway barefoot in her pajamas, silently fuming as sirens lit up the street. The woman who had once called 911 over a mailbox repaint had now become a full-blown fugitive. It didn't take long to find her. She'd driven to a remote rental cabin 2 towns over that belonged to her cousin. She didn't make it inside. Local police intercepted her at the gas station nearby, looking rattled and exhausted. In her back seat was a box of shredded papers, a burner phone, and a stack of handwritten letters addressed to various news outlets. When asked what she was doing, she reportedly said, "Fixing the narrative." Her arrest was quiet but final. This time there were no viral videos, no memes, no camera crews. Just flashing lights, paperwork, and a booking photo that would end up front and center on every neighborhood bulletin board by morning. Karen was charged with bail violation, tampering with electronic monitoring equipment, and attempted obstruction of justice. This wasn't a slap on the wrist anymore. The leniency she'd once enjoyed evaporated. The court revoked her bail and remanded her into federal custody. She was placed in a minimum security facility to await trial, and all HOA privileges, what few remained, were formally revoked. For the first time in what felt like forever, the neighborhood exhaled. Amina testified again, this time as the closing witness. The prosecution's case had been strengthened by Karen's flight attempt, her digital communications, and the testimony of the now cooperating operative. The judge didn't mince words during sentencing. He described Karen as dangerously self-righteous and willfully ignorant, noting that her actions had not only obstructed justice but had potentially endangered a multi-state investigation. Her sentence, 12 months in a federal rehabilitation facility, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory psychological counseling. It wasn't exactly prison, but it was a far cry from the wine-soaked HOA meetings she used to rule. Back in the neighborhood, life resumed a strange normalcy. New HOA elections were held. The candidates included a war veteran, a retired judge, and a third-grade teacher, all people with common sense and zero interest in micromanaging garden fences. Amina declined a nomination. She preferred to leave the politics to others and focus on her work. She'd already done more for the community than any board member ever had. 1 month later, we hosted a community block party. Not to celebrate Karen's downfall, but to reclaim the sense of unity she had managed to divide. Neighbors brought food. Kids played on the lawn. Someone even brought a karaoke machine. Midway through the evening, The DJ announced a dedication and played the infamous remix of Karen's Meltdown, complete with beats and auto-tune. Everyone laughed, even the older folks who didn't fully get the joke. Amina shook her head but smiled anyway. It was a moment of closure. A reminder that no matter how loud one person could be, the collective could be louder when united. Somewhere during dessert, a group of residents gathered around Amina with a handmade plaque. It read, "To Agent Amina Patel, Defender of Justice, Slayer of HOA Tyrants, Guardian of Suburbia." She laughed so hard she had to sit down. Someone took a photo. It would later hang in the clubhouse above the coffee machine with a little gold plate beneath it. It was both a tribute and a warning. As for Karen, she eventually resurfaced. A quiet press release from her lawyer announced she had completed her sentence and would be moving to a different county. Rumor had it she tried to run for a position on the local beautification committee but was denied due to recent complications with federal law enforcement. No one missed her. The house she once lived in was sold at auction to a young couple with 3 kids and a rescue dog, who immediately removed the camera system she had installed and repainted the front porch the very color she once banned. The story faded from the headlines, but not from memory. New neighbors asked about it occasionally, and the tale was passed down like a suburban campfire story. The moral was always the same. Never underestimate a woman in a uniform, and never call 911 on someone unless you're absolutely sure they aren't a federal agent. Because you might end up in handcuffs, not the other way around.